Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. From websites and online stores, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello, friends. I hope that you've been well. Today, we are continuing my Zodiac portrait series. If you're new here, I have been embarking on a portrait series of all the different zodiacs. Today, we are going to be working on Aries. If you haven't seen the previous ones, I have done Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, which are all their own YouTube videos if you're interested in seeing the process. The art supplies that are being used in this illustration are the same as the previous ones, where I'm using hot press watercolor paper, watercolors, acrylic gouache, color pencils, and some ink. But I will still go through all of the different kind of process elements of this piece, as well as talk about the inspiration and the design choices that I made for this illustration, since I am trying to make them coordinate with the astrology sign. And even though I have now done this 3 or 4 times, I'm noticing that each time there's always some kind of new challenge that I need to overcome. I don't know what it is. No matter how many times I work with a medium, I feel like I'm just teaching myself to learn how to paint all over again. There's just something about traditional media that comes with so many unpredictable elements, but that's what also makes it so engaging to use. But before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. As you probably know by now, Squarespace is a great website building platform that is perfect for a variety of creatives. Personally, as someone who creates illustrations as well as YouTube videos, a very useful feature that I have come across is that I can attach a link to the corresponding illustration on my gallery, which allows me to feature 2 pieces of content at once. This is especially helpful if anyone is curious about the materials or the process of a particular illustration. It can take them directly to the video, which is so quick and efficient. So if you're interested in launching your own website, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/I'mAWonder for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So using watercolors, at first I was going in with this yellowy tone first, and then using the magenta on top of it while it was still wet to try and create some soft gradients and shading, but it was turning out really patchy. So when I moved on to the face, I decided to kind of do it in reverse. So I used the magenta first in the kind of blushy toned areas, and then using like a clean wet brush, I kind of blended it out into the white of the paper. And then when that was mostly dry, I went in with the yellow skin tone on top, and both scenarios came out essentially giving me the same result, which was super patchy and a lot of blooming effects that I didn't want. And I actually ran into this problem with my previous illustration of Pisces, but I assumed that I was having difficulties with the watercolors for the skin because it was a deeper skin tone, whereas I find that with watercolors I have an easier time when it is a lighter skin tone, but that proved to be wrong because I completely was dumbfounded with how to approach the skin for this character. So I decided to give it a rest for now and then move on to the hair. So I actually wet the surface first with just water and then went in with the pinks and reds so that you can see it sort of blooms with each other and creates a lot of soft gradients, which is definitely what I wanted to achieve and what I love about using watercolors. I obviously wasn't able to achieve the same look when I was using them for the skin tone, but I find with hair it's a lot more forgiving than it is with a portrait on the face. And then for the background, I knew I wanted to continue with the gradients. And this was really, really challenging, but also actually pretty fun because I had to paint around all of the kind of yellow smoke areas, but also create a gradient. In this case, I made sure to have the pink and the 2 shades of purple already mixed and ready to go on my palette so that I was able to switch from color to color very quickly. And I've said this before that with hot press paper, I find that the colors don't blend and bleed into one another quite as seamlessly as it does with cold press paper. And I'm someone who is more used to cold press paper, and I'm still sort of getting my figuring out watercolor paper that's hot press, that's super smooth, but slowly, making my way through it. I originally thought I was going to paint around all of the kind of hardware elements on the top, but that was just going to be so time consuming and really difficult to get that gradient. So I decided to just paint over them, and then I would use gouache and ink to carve out the hardware back into the top later. And if I'm being totally honest, while I was struggling through the watercolor process on the skin of this portrait, it genuinely made me reconsider why bother using watercolors at all, because these past couple of portraits, for some reason, the watercolor has been so challenging for me to use. But then I remember for the Aquarius portrait back in February, I felt like I had a good handle on the watercolors. So I really am wondering if it's potentially makes more sense for me to skip using watercolors altogether on the skin and just use the acrylic gouache and colored pencils instead. But once the portrait was done, I was able to kind of pinpoint the areas that had just watercolors on it and had a lot of heavy acrylic gouache on it, and the bits with the colored pencil. And in the end, it does make me glad that I persevered, because there's just a very different quality that each medium has, and I think it brings a lot of visual interest of textures and kind of nuances to the illustration. So it's just a matter of continuing to trust the process, I guess. And I just felt like mentioning that because I know many of you probably think that the process is smooth sailing, or it just looks so much more effortless when it's sped up and edited like this versus the actual reality of when I'm painting them. I'm going through so many stages of anxiety and stress and, just questioning all of my life decisions. But I hope that knowing, those feelings that I go through makes you feel better about those feelings when you are working on something, and to help motivate you to persevere and just kind of push through. And now comes the kind of point of the illustration where I felt definitely a lot more confident. I think now that I've been using the acrylic gouache is being introduced into the illustration, and I find that when the painting already has paints on it, it just feels way less daunting than when you're just looking at a blank page. And something that I just love doing with acrylic gouache and the colored pencils is bringing back the highlights. It just looks so satisfying. And also just all the kind of smoothing out of the colors on top of that patchy watercolor. But something that I want to note about this process is I definitely make sure to have the acrylic gouache really, really watered down so that the layers are quite thin. That way they are leaning a little bit more transparent, so you can still see the work that has been done underneath. And also I find that the colored pencils need something like to grip onto a little bit. So I find that the slightly more thinner glazes just help with that a lot better. And talk about the actual design choices that I made for this portrait. So as you might know, the Aries sign is a fire sign. Up until this point, we have done an earth sign for Capricorn, which for the background, I had some mountains. And then for Aquarius, which is an air sign, I had clouds in the background. And for Pisces, which is a water sign, I had the background be like an underwater kind of scenario. And then with Aries for fire, I didn't want to do literal fire, like flames in the background, because I didn't want it to read like Guy Fieri, going to Flavor Town vibes. And so I had toyed with the idea of potentially using magma or lava in the background instead, but then I ended up landing on the kind of smoke in the background because I really wanted to include tiger lilies, because tiger lilies are a flower that's associated with the Aries sign. And so it also made me think about the previous zodiac illustration series that I did, where for Aries, she was like a kind of princess Xena warrior vibe, and I had this character in kind of a wasteland war zone thing, and there was like the smoke coming up, and I thought that kind of design and the colors just like worked really well. So I decided, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So I decided to kind of repeat that motif again here. And to me, it just looks more subtle to indicate fire as opposed to literal flames. And it also really helps in creating the sense of movement across the illustration, to have the smoke sort of, drifting towards the right, as well as our character looking towards the right and her hair sort of swishing in that motion as well. Because with Aries, their personalities are quite bold and dynamic. So that was definitely something that I really wanted to pay attention to for this character. And in that vein, Aries being a fire sign, the color most associated with this sign is red. And I knew I wanted to include red for this character. And initially, I actually was going to have her hair be a dark purple and then her outfit be all red. But then I thought, you know what? I actually don't use like a classic red for hair that often, and I also felt like the red would contrast against the black background a lot better than a dark purple would. So it was kind of a win-win. And then of course I made a lot of her makeup red and like elements of the dress red. For the hairstyle, again, I wanted it to be very bold. And so initially I thought about doing a high ponytail, which is what I did for the previous Aries illustration. I knew I definitely wanted to give her blunt bangs, and I will admit, going with this bob, it definitely was reminiscent of Lisa from Blackpink, as well as Victoria Beckham from the Spice Girls, who are both Aries, which just makes total sense in my book. So to me, it just looks very fierce, and I definitely think fierce is a big component for what I attribute to a personality trait for Aries. And then when it came to the clothing and accessories, I really wanted something that felt really edgy, but also still had that sense of femininity. And so I was inspired by a couple of different Alexandra McQueen pieces. Of course, all of the different bits of hardware, the leather, but also these ruffled shoulders. Not only do these shoulders create a really severe kind of silhouette, I definitely associate, a strong shoulder with like, a power suit, and we love a woman in a power suit. And so they also feel a little bit feminine because they're a ruffle as opposed to like, an armored spike or something. And I think that is something that Alexandra McQueen was really well known for, was balancing these edgy elements with femininity. Which, by the way, if you like hearing about the specific images, designers, and, references that I use in my illustrations, over on my Patreon page for the $5 tier and up, I post my Pinterest board and I post sketches of all the different hairstyles and costumes and poses that I go through for these illustrations. So just wanted to plug that in if you like knowing about a little bit more detail of the behind the scenes. Because I associate Aries with traits like being a leader and a trailblazer, I definitely wanted her to be a fighter in a way. And so that's what I indicated with the kind of sword earrings And yeah, I ended up being quite happy with the expression. I wanted her to look confident and also a little bit smug to a degree, like she knows that she is a bad bitch, which I think comes through with her pose as well. A major takeaway though, after I finished this piece and scanned it to create the postcard and sticker for my Patreon page, I remembered why for the past number of zodiac portraits I had been avoiding using neon and fluorescent paints, which I ended up using for this one. The thing with neon and fluorescent paints, they are so beautiful and look amazing in person, but once you try to recreate them when you scan it and print it again, it's impossible to capture and it ends up looking a lot flatter than it does in person. And so while this portrait looks really, really vibrant in person, and I feel like the hair especially looks a lot more dimensional, in the screen and with the print and sticker, it looks a lot flatter because the kind of fluorescence and neons just don't read the same. So unfortunately, I will have to make sure not to use fluorescence and neons in the next Zodiac portrait series moving forward, or if I do, use it like very sparingly. But that's just how it is being an artist. You constantly learn lessons and then you have to relearn those lessons over and over until you finally learn. But anyway, that pretty much wraps up today's video. I hope that you enjoyed this portrait. Thanks so much for all of the enthusiasm for this Zodiac series. I'm glad that you're enjoying it. And for those of you who are interested in receiving a postcard and or matching sticker of this Aries illustration, you still have until April 30th to sign up for my Patreon page to receive her in the mail next month. And that's going to be it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. I would really appreciate a comment and a like to help me with the algorithm gods on YouTube. And yeah, I hope you have an amazing day or evening wherever you're at, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.